Hello and welcome to Super Insider, where we chat about what you need to know to make the most out of your super. I'm Anne Fuchs and I'm the Executive General Manager of Advice, Guidance and Education at Australian Retirement Trust. And just a reminder that what we discuss today is general advice only, so you will need to decide if it's right for you. Today we've got another instalment of our Q&A series where the team answer some of our most frequently asked questions about everything to do with super. On the show today, we're talking about getting ready to retire. And I've asked Ruth Weaver and Adele Fisk from our member education team to come into the studio and answer some of the questions about retirement that our members and listeners and people in the wider community ask us the most. So for now, I'll hand over to Ruth and Adele.
Thanks for that, and welcome everybody. My name is Ruth Weaver and I'm part of the education team here at Australian Retirement Trust, and I'm delighted to be joined by Adele, who is one of our qualified financial advisors. And today we're going to talk you through some frequently asked questions that we hear quite a lot from people who are getting close to retirement and just want a little bit of an understanding on what kind of things they should be thinking about now. We're going to start at the very beginning today, Adele, and I think we'll start with helping our listeners understand when they can technically start thinking about retirement. And very often people assume there is such an age as retirement age, but in actual fact, retirement age can be any age you want it to be, can't it?
That's right, Ruth. I get a lot of people coming to me, and when I'm talking to them, they say, when am I supposed to retire? What's the age that I can retire? And with superannuation, there is no specific age. It's when you're ready to retire and can financially retire from the workforce. What I'm finding, Ruth, is a lot of the people I speak to are retiring later. So they may come to me, and in this day and age, they're saying 62, maybe 65 when they'll look at retiring. So it has gone up. We've noticed that the age that people want to retire is going up. But that's not a bad thing, because that impacts in a positive way, the longevity or how long their super will last into retirement. If they retire later, they'll have more super.
That's right. And I think it's also important to remember that, the age pension age, currently sitting at 67, is one particular age, but access to superannuation can be as low as age 60. And very often for people, retirement age might actually sit somewhere in between those ages, isn't it?
Yeah, that's correct. So although the pension age is 67, retirement for people may occur before that. And there's lots of reasons why people retire. Sometimes they're just ready to leave their job. They want to retire from the workforce and relax. Other times it's due to ill health, they're unwell, and they have to retire. So then that's the stage when they just finish up with the workforce. And what we also find is that some people ease into retirement. They might work part-time and just take their time going into retirement, or some people just pull the pin and they finish straight away. So there's so many different stories that we hear, and it's so important to realise that there's not one size fits all when it comes to when to retire.
That's right. There's lots of different ways. It's far less common now to go from full-time work to full-time retirement.
Absolutely.
And I think as well, a question that often comes through with members is, when can I actually access super? So we talked about the fact that, you may qualify for age pension from the age of 67. But superannuation accessibility can happen very well before that age. And it does mean that you can consider accessing super when you reach what we call preservation age. So what is actual preservation age?
Well, that's right. A lot of people do wonder, what is this strange word, preservation age? Because it's a bit antiquated, but essentially it's the age that you can access your superannuation. So preservation age, from the age of 60, that's more people I speak to now are 60 or over and retiring. So I'll mention that a cashing condition or a condition of release in super is reaching the age of 60 and permanently retiring. And if people are born after the 30th of June 1964, their preservation age is 60. So essentially, if they retire from the workforce, they can access their super. And also 65 is another milestone age. So that when people hit 65, they don't have to retire, Ruth. They can keep working and draw down from super if need be.
That's right. And I think it's worth reminding our listeners as well that even once you've reached preservation age and you are still working, there are some ways that you might be able to access some of your superannuation through what we call a transition to retirement. And we have a great podcast on that for any of our listeners that would like to go back and listen to that particular episode. I think as well, a really common question that people ask is around, how much do I need for retirement? What's the magic number to get to? And the reality is there is no balance. There's no perfect balance in your superannuation.
That's
what
right.
somebody needs for retirement will be very much dependent on a lot of personal factors, actually. So
Yes.
things like how long you might be in retirement. Obviously, the younger you retire, the more money you're going to need. Whether you're retiring as a single person and, you're responsible for funding everything, or whether you're able to join assets together with somebody else.
That's true.
Your health, whether you've got any health considerations that might need to be a bit of a drain on you financially, I suppose. Whether you're entering retirement with debt, it's far more common now to see people with debt or even financial dependence.
Absolutely.
So all of those factors need to be considered. But I guess one of the most important factors is lifestyle. What exactly is it that you're wanting to do versus your neighbour? And
Absolutely.
the lifestyle you're wanting to live will be a big indicator of how much superannuation you need. So I guess for the purposes of listeners, where's a good starting point? I think we're all human. We all want some kind of a benchmark to work off. So what would you do if you were talking to somebody or giving advice to somebody about where to start with this process?
Absolutely. There's a lot of different factors to think about when you're heading towards that retirement phase, or even wanting to know how much is enough. So one of the things we talk about is you can go to the Association of Super Funds Australia, or ASFA website, and have a look at some of their recommendations. And they give an idea of, for example, a super balance for a couple or a single at retirement, what that could possibly be if they were debt-free at retirement, and also if they had, they have their own primary place of residence, they're not renting. So considerations would be, of course, when people speak to me, some have done their budget, some haven't done their budget. So budget is a really important factor. So for people that have done their budget, it makes it a much smoother process, particularly when going through the advice process. And it means that you can feel confident that you can afford retirement and leave your role at work and be comfortable just living the lifestyle you want to. There's also a recommendation, Ruth, on the ASFA website it's called the 2/3 rule. So if we think about lifestyle, everyone's lifestyle is different, like you said. So for some people, if they're on $120,000 a year, pre-retirement, they're going to need more than someone who lives on a lot less than that. So the 2/3 rule talks about having at least about 2/3 of your pre-retirement income in the retirement phase, having paid off all of your mortgage and everything.
Yeah, that's a great point. We don't tend to see people entering into retirement with an increased income needs compared to those, compared to what you would have had as you're paying a mortgage, paying taxes, and maybe supporting dependents. We do tend to see that there'll be a dip in what's needed during those retirement years somewhat.
That's right.
Now, I think it's worth reminding people as well that, funding the retirement, there's lots of different ways that you can start to get your hands on your superannuation. And there's no really right or wrong way either. It can depend very much on what your preferences are. So I'll premise it by saying, you don't actually have to touch your superannuation at all when you retire. You might have a spouse at home working still. You might have assets that are generating enough income for the moment. And maybe you just need to leave your superannuation alone, let it continue to accumulate returns until you're ready to start accessing it. But once you are ready to start accessing it, there's lots of different ways that you might think about doing that. A really common method is through what we call an income account, where you're moving your money from an accumulation stage of superannuation into a stage where you're actually drawing the money down. And the beauty of the income accounts is they do look and feel very much like the superannuation account you've become familiar with. You very often have access to the same investment opportunities, but the difference is with an income account, money is now coming out of it. And you're able to determine with the super fund how often you'd like to get paid, but also how much you'd like to get paid. So people can structure it very differently, can't they? Sometimes they might actually access directly through super, or sometimes they might prefer to put some into income accounts. What are you seeing or hearing when you're talking to individuals about what their preferences are here, or how would someone decide which way to structure the superannuation so that they can get it into their wallet and actually start enjoying it?
Oh, it's a really great question, Ruth, because there are so many different people that I speak to with different situations. But it's really all about the requirement for income. So with income accounts, the retirement income accounts, it's a special pool of money that you put your funds into. And there are rules within that environment. For example, there is the $1.9 million transfer balance cap. So people cannot transfer more than that amount into the retirement income account. So that's a consideration. Do they need the income? Do they have other assets outside? And that's why it's important to sort of get an advisor, a financial advisor, to look at that. There's also the consideration of, do I just do lump sum withdrawals from my accumulation account, or do I start up a retirement income account? It can be quite a tough decision for people, but that's something that we talk about every day, and it's a really useful decision.
And I think people can also be put at ease by the fact that if you do decide to move your superannuation, or even some of your superannuation, into an income account, it's not for life. It doesn't have to be for life. So if for any reason your situation changes and you no longer need that income, you can revert it back into your superannuation account. You can change what you're drawing down from it, etc., etc. So it's a very flexible way to hold. I think, Adele, we might just touch very quickly, though, on one of the key benefits of holding your money in the income account. Why is it, or what is it that generally draws people into that product?
Well, the retirement income account is what we call a tax-free environment. Yeah. So when people reach their preservation age and they do want to draw down on their super and they need the funds, then there's no tax on earnings, which is a big, big kicker for them in terms of the longevity of their superannuation, so how long it will last down the track. So with that zero tax environment, it means that their investment option is not taxed at all by the ATO. So that is a big benefit to people of leaving their money in that environment. And they might draw a bit from their super and a bit from the age pension. So nothing is set in stone. One thing to be mindful with transition to retirement accounts is that they are taxed at 15% on earnings. So different to the retirement income account in the fact that if people are in that transition to retirement account, there will still be tax on their investment earnings. There's lots of flexibility and lots of ways that their funds can last as long as possible for them.
It's also a good point to remind people that when it comes to retirement, and we talked a little bit already about the fact that you may have various different sources of income. So superannuation for some people might be the only source, or it might be the main source, or it might not be an important source of income at all. Many households across Australia who are in that retirement phase are probably drawing income from different channels. So maybe a blend of some money coming through the income account connected to their superannuation, maybe getting some or all of the age pension, and maybe even having a small amount of income coming from an asset that sits outside of superannuation. So retirement income can come from various channels. But with age pension, I think that's the one that we tend to find people getting close to retirement are very mindful of, around, when can I access age pension? What are some of the rules or the things I should be aware of when it's time for me to knock on Centrelink's door and see whether I'm going to qualify for any of this or not?
So for the age pension, to be eligible for the age pension, you have to reach a certain age. But for people born after the 1st of January 1957, that age is 67 years old. So at 67 years old, they can knock on Centrelink's door and go through the application process to apply for the age pension. So in terms of rules, there's a couple of rules to consider. So first, there's a test. So the test is either an income test, or an assets test. And people are tested under both of these for Centrelink purposes. So income might include any other income earned or investment income. And assets are they are everything outside of the family home. So any other asset, including super, outside of the family home is assessable under the assets test. And generally what happens is if people, the lower amount of age pension under one of the tests, so say they have the lowest pension under the assets test, that's the test that they will be assessed under for their Centrelink. Now people are assessed differently depending on their circumstances. So there's Centrelink assesses singles and couples separately, and also homeowners and non-homeowners separately. So when they go into Centrelink, they will have different assessments in terms of the amount that's under the assets test and income test, depending on their situation.
And I think it's an interesting point you make when they do both the asset test and the income test. To put it bluntly, the worst result is what you get, is what comes out in the wash, isn't it? Which is unfortunate for people, but it is worth being aware of that, particularly before you're talking to Centrelink. Now, there is lots of information even on the ATO page around what those thresholds are, around what you can earn, as well as what you can actually have in assets. And it's important for people to also know that, just because you don't qualify for the full age pension doesn't mean you won't get some of the age pension. And there's many, many Australians at the moment where they're not on full age pension, but they are enjoying the part pension. And as you're spending your assets during those retirement years, you may very well qualify for the full age pension later on in your retirement. So when it comes to the source of income that's probably going to come from the superannuation, if we think about an individual who would like that regular flow through that income account that we discussed, just giving people a bit of a visual on how that works. And I think it's not as complicated as you might think. In actual fact, what you're doing is moving some or all of your money out of your accumulation account into, as I said, an account that looks and feels so much like that accumulation account you've had. So it's not at all unusual for people to have both accounts. You can leave some in superannuation, move some into the pension account or the retirement income account, and then decide how much of that you'd like to draw down on an annual basis. And depending on the super funds, they give you a lot of flexibility here. They might say you can draw down fortnightly or monthly or quarterly or, even biannually or annually, depending on how you want to draw it down. Some of the key features to be mindful of with this particular product is the fact that there is a minimum amount you need to draw down, isn't there? And that's just something to be mindful of, but there's not a maximum amount. So just maybe for our listeners, give a quick overview of what that would mean.
That's exactly right, Ruth. So with the retirement income account, there are minimum pension factors for each age group, and they generally range from 10-year periods of age. So for people under the age of 65, their minimum pension factor would be 4%. So I give the example to the people I speak to of a person that rolls $100,000 into a retirement income account. On the 1st of July, each financial year, the minimum is assessed. And for that person, the minimum would be, if under age 65, would be $4,000. Now, it doesn't have to be taken in one hit. It can be taken, as you said, over 26 fortnights, 12 months, just depending on their lifestyle and their budget and what suits them. But of course, if they are in the actual retirement income account, they can take more than the minimum. There's no maximum amount, so they can draw down whatever suits their budget and lifestyle to achieve that annual income that they've discussed with us.
I think that's a great point for our listeners to put their minds at ease, that you are not restricted at all on what you can pull out of this particular product. If it's getting close to Christmas or you've got a trip coming up, you're also able to pull a lump sum out of that particular product. So you're not restricted to a regular flow of income. If you do need an extra jot of cash into the bank account for whatever reason, you absolutely can do that. So let's talk now a little bit about tax in retirement. And it's a good news story, I think, isn't it, for many people, particularly where you do hold a lot of your wealth in your superannuation and you are planning on moving that into an income account. To some extent, it's not an over-exaggeration to say that your funds might be sitting in a tax-free haven.
Well, that's right, Ruth. So when people are leave their funds in the superannuation environment and draw down, they are in a tax-free environment if they are in the retirement income account. But one important factor that people often get confused about is the fact that the money coming out to their bank account is tax-free if they're over the age of 60 years old and they meet a condition of release. So that money comes out of their account tax-free to bank accounts. So whether they're an accumulation account or a retirement income account, money in the bank, tax-free. It's just that consideration of the 15% earnings tax in the accumulation account versus the zero tax environment of the retirement income account.
There is a really interesting exception. I don't know if exception is the right word, but an extra ability, if you like, for people to contribute money into superannuation through the downsizer rule. So the downsizer is really whereby someone getting close to retirement might decide to downsize their principal place of residence. And by doing that, now there are rules around how long you've had to live in the property, etc. But the motivation behind that is to give people an extra opportunity again, isn't it, to build up that superannuation balance. Is this something that pops up much during your advice appointments?
Ruth, it absolutely does. We're getting more and more calls around the downsizer contribution. So it's essentially a rule that's been recently introduced where people over the age of 55, if they sell their primary place of residence, can put up to $300,000 into their super as a separate standalone contribution. So it doesn't count towards any of the other caps. But just people have to consider, of course, things like Centrelink implications if they are on Centrelink benefits of any kind, and also think about the caps that are in place, like the transfer balance cap and that side of things. So there are considerations where it would be worthwhile speaking to a financial advisor just to make sure they're not doing themselves harm in any way. But the downsizer contribution, there's no lifetime limit. So people who are maybe going into aged care and they're in their 80s and they're selling their home can still put money into the super environment. So that just really has such a positive impact on the longevity of their super, their peace of mind, and their outcomes with their financial outcomes.
Thanks, Adele. I love that. The value that the peace of mind, being able to have the opportunity to get that asset, because up until now we would have often found that money sitting in a bank account and really not getting as much benefit from it as you could in an environment like superannuation. Now, I hate to be a dampener on the conversation, but we are going to have to turn to a more morbid element of superannuation. And the reality is we're all eventually going to pass away. And if we haven't been able to time it exactly perfectly, which, let's be honest, none of us will, there will very likely, hopefully, at least for a lot of us, be some superannuation still left by the time we pass away. So I guess it's important for our listeners to realise that even if you've passed away and there is money in your superannuation account or there's money in the income stream account, that money will be passed on to your family, your dependents, for example. So is this a big part of the conversations that you're having through your advice with your advised clients on how to consider their dependents and how they'd like that money to be left behind in the event of their death?
Well, Ruth, we do talk about it at a high level. So we tell them about the types of nominations they can have. But one really important thing that a lot of the people I speak to don't know is that superannuation does not form part of your will or your estate. It is a separate environment. So it's important to remember that. And I'm not an estate planning expert, so I always say, please speak to your estate planning specialist, your solicitor, to find out what's right for you. But essentially, there's three types of nominations. There's a non-binding, a binding that's binding to the Board of Trustees. And then for people that have income streams, there's also a reversionary beneficiary option. And the reversionary beneficiary option is like it sounds. If someone passes away, the pension or income stream reverts to their beneficiary. So they have the option to leave it in that environment. The beneficiary can keep getting the payments, have that peace of mind that they're still financially okay, and that's another option for people as they head into the retirement phase.
I'll do a shameless plug now and let our listeners know that we do actually have an episode on what happens to your superannuation in the event of your death. So for anyone that is interested in learning a little bit more about that, you can maybe go back and have a listen to that. And finally, before I get you to give your sort of wrap up or your top 3 tips, if you like, for people who are, maybe 6 to 12 months out, an important consideration is around insurances. So, for many of us going through our superannuation accumulation stage, we might very well have maybe life insurance or total permanent disability cover. Keep an eye on it. Depending on how you've structured it, it might be starting to get expensive as you're getting close to retirement. You might have gotten to a point where, because you can access superannuation, you'll reassess whether you still need that insurance. It is an important thing to think about. The last point I have here is to seek advice from a financial planner. And given you are a financial planner and you have these conversations every single day, how would you coach, or what kind of top tips would you give someone who's not far off retirement and very much looking forward to it?
There's so many things people can do. I would say just really take an active participation in your retirement. Don't leave it to the last minute. So planning is key. Important things are thinking of your budget. That's a key point. If you know what you're going to spend, then you'll feel confident and comfortable going into retirement. Think of things that you want to include in your budget, like travel, things that will make your lifestyle, pleasurable. You'll be living the lifestyle that you dreamed of in retirement. So having that budget in place is really important. And all the other things you mentioned, insurances, review your investments. You've got help from financial advisors out there that will do this for you and enjoy doing this for you and helping you plan the pathway to retirement. So everything you mentioned, Ruth, and just making sure that you're taking ownership and participating in your retirement goals will make all the difference.
Adele, it's been an absolute pleasure. I could keep going for a lot longer, but unfortunately we have come to time. We've covered lots of information for people. So thank you so much for joining me today, and hopefully we'll get you back again soon. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Ruth.
Well, that's all we have time for today. We've got some more Q&A sessions coming up. So if you do have questions, we'd love to answer them. Please send us an email at podcast@art.com.au. That's podcast@art.com.au. Thank you so much for listening to Super Insider, and we hope you can join us again next time.